Okay, so I'm always a firm believer of basically as soon as you learned a new skill and ability, to basically optimize the skill and ability and then work on this and on these skills. And as soon as you are a master of these, you basically give it away and you teach someone else how to do it, and then you go on to the next thing and learn something else.
It's DeAndre, and this is the Pioneers Show, the show where we talk with innovators, makers, entrepreneurs, basically people who are trailing their own trails and creating their own lives, so that we all can learn how to work on our own lives. If this is your first time, I really appreciate you taking the time to listening this episode. Subscribe and enjoy listening to the pioneers of today. And if you're a repeat listener, welcome back. This is episode 23, and I'm your host, André Talpkerk. You can find me at It's DeAndre on Twitter, as well as the show at Pioneers Show on Instagram. In today's show, I bring you Max Bauermeister. He's the co-founder of ArgoS, a very intriguing startup that is trying to develop what they call an operating system for organization. He knows Niklas Steiker from early in this podcast, and he once again tackled the topics of holacracy and self-management, a topic that I am deeply, deeply fascinated by. In this conversation, we go through Max's story, his work as an HR person going on to management consulting, and now a co-founder of a startup. We also go through Max's views on automation, learning new skills, and how we can work to make ourselves better every day. I really hope this conversation serves as an idea how you can always keep improving and learning new topics. Without talking a lot more, let's jump into the conversation with Max Bauermeister. Welcome to the show, Max. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm looking forward to this now. I'm very, I like to be interviewed, right? I've done a lot of interviews in my life where I interviewed people, and now
it's the time the tables have turned.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm looking forward.
So, Max, by the way, welcome to the Pioneers Show. It's a great honor to have you here, and it's actually something that I'm quite glad I have you here. I remember when I walked into Factory the first time. Factory Berlin is a co-working community space in Berlin. And you were the one, wow, you do podcasts. I love those things. And we had a great conversation. So Max, thank you very much for being here. And I'm very glad to have you on the Pioneers Show. So for people at home who don't know who you are, care to give us a presentation?
Yeah, so sure. So I was basically born and raised in Berlin. Went to school here, to a bilingual school called John F. Kennedy School, which is basically American and German. And then after school, I decided to go to university in London and studied there business with a specific focus on HR, actually. Mm-hmm. And then got into my first job.
So we can start out right from there. What was your first job, by the way?
So it was actually Groupon. It was basically back in the day when Groupon was still branded as My City Deal. Mm-hmm. And was basically a sort of subsidiary of Rocket Internet. So they had launched multiple clones of Groupon back in the day, and then they ran really well in parts of Europe. So Groupon just decided to take over My City Deal, and that was my first job.
So, and what were you doing at Groupon, by the way?
So I was involved in the HR, building up the HR processes and policies, and of course hiring a lot of people. So back in the day, I mean, if you think about it, I joined Groupon when we were like 20 people in the London office, or 30 people, I think. So it was quite small. And then we ramped up within like 2 years to, I think it was 400, 500 people in the office. And that, of course, was a very, very fantastic experience to have. And you basically saw the growth of a company within a very short amount of time, which is and spectacular growth, actually.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Groupon also very big in China? Or is there anything like coupon things? Because I'm pretty sure that there's one very big player in China as well. I don't know if it's Groupon or...
So, I mean, I'm not sure about the space in China, to be honest. Of course, there's Alibaba in Asia, and they probably have some sort of like, company that's focusing on that as well. Yeah, probably.
So you finished university after studying HR and HR processes, like you said, and your first job was straight away Groupon.
Yeah.
Which is actually quite an enviable
assuming that it's a rocket internet company.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of capital behind it. So the chances of it failing, it's actually quite hard, if we can say that. It can fail as any company, but I assume that having that amount of capital, you can do a lot of things. So how long were you working for Groupon?
I was working there roughly 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah. And I worked all the way to the IPO basically. And then when things sort of stagnated, so when really like formal policies and processes due to this IPO came in place, this was no longer really a place that I thought was interesting to me.
Okay, so you were already interested in more agile teams, let's call it that way.
Well, what caught my attention was this growth phase. So really the phase when you're ramping up,
going from 0 to 1, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I learned a lot from guys that are still in the industry. Yeah, so the CEO back in the day of Groupon there was Chris Moore, who's now was one of the founders of Auto 1 here in Germany, and a lot of great, of course, ex-McKinsey and BCG managers there were basically that provided me with a lot of learning. So I saw how to manage and scale up teams, and that really inflicted my interest. And also, of course, I mean, you mentioned this fact that we had there was money there, but basically we learned to work with a lot of artificial pressure, right? So and there's still a tactic that is probably necessary in most startups. When you're feeling very comfortable, you need to really get out of the seat, stand up and really focus and drive forward. And this you can do a lot through artificial pressure.
If I may ask, what got you less interested after the IPO? Because I don't want to sound too general here, but maybe the question might sound a little bit weird, but I assume that if you grow a company from 20 people in London all the way to an IPO, it has to be quite big, the growth, the thing that you're interested in. But after the IPO, there's also a lot of struggles, I assume.
Yes.
I've never done an IPO, probably never will, but I assume that going through that stage also has a lot of challenges, right?
Yeah. I think there's triggers, right? And I think along those 2.5 years, there was a lot of triggers, but one of the big triggers for sure was when we, and I remember this quite clearly, when we had to basically outsource customer service, for example, and we had huge layoffs back then. And this was a process that I thought, okay, if we maybe had known this prior, that maybe to not insource some functions, then we would have never had this problem, right? Can
you talk a little bit more about that, because that actually might be interesting for business people who don't want to go through firing sprees. What are the knowledge that you gain from their experience?
So I mean, this is what we do as well. Today at OS, for example, or at WeFox, where I worked previously, I was always a big fan of setting up a function, testing it, trialing it, and then if it works, and it's very maybe standard work that you can outsource, then always outsource and have the flexibility, right? Because I think there's nothing worse than having to lay off people, actually. So growing sustainably, and that can also mean that maybe in the beginning you have one customer service rep. You basically set up all the processes and policies with this person, all the operations, and then you basically look at scaling this, but not in-house, but
outsourcing through agencies or other consultancy businesses.
Because this puts the risk basically to another third party. And this also means that this third party anyway has contracts with these employees. So if they don't have a project with us, they'll receive a project from someone else. So they don't get laid off, essentially.
But how do you define when a process is no longer manageable in-house and when it's good to do it outsourced, or do you think it's important to outsource it from the get-go?
No. I think from the start you have to basically define the processes and the operations, and you have to see what works and what doesn't work, right? So really, that starts with a process flow chart, and then optimizing it and seeing how it works, seeing the triggers in this flow chart, and then trialing it and seeing how it works in real life with real customers, And then when you see, okay, this works fine, there's no hiccups along the line, and it's just repeatable, so you can repeat this process over and over again, then I would take this process and I would give it to basically these maybe call centers or whatever, or whomever you're outsourcing it, because they're also experts in repeating things on a very high level, on very high SLAs, basically.
I assume it's always scary when you have to go on a firing spree. I don't just say scary as in, I don't know if we're going to make it, but as a person that you scaled that company, you saw those people get in, you trained those people, you educated to go on but did you fire all those people because their role was no longer manageable, or was there anything that you over managed to get to that point? I think that's interesting and important for me to learn as well, is how do I see, or are there any metrics, anything that I can understand when a group of people or even a whole department, it's no longer a good asset to have in the company and should be outsourced? Of course, is there any metric or is there any time, let's put it this way, that you can understand when it starts to become a burden on the growth of the company itself? So is there any time in a business where you see, for example, customer service department no longer being a good asset for the company and that you should outsource maybe?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of metrics that are important here, is things like turnover, right? Engagement rates of people. How often are they maybe not actually in the office? Are they, what's the tendency to have sick days, for example? And all these metrics you can assess, and hiring and retaining, I would say work like call center work, for example, is very tough, right? Because it takes a certain type of person also to do this job and to stay focused, and it's a very repetitive, monotonous job, basically, right? That's done. If you see metrics such as absence levels, of course, is a growth, because of course, as a company, your overheads that you have, your people overheads are super expensive, right? They're a huge amount of the budget, and this is also what a lot of founders also look at immediately, and because it's a large basically cost bucket is the people. So when you have an issue in the company, the tendency to look towards the people operation cost is quite high, right? So, and that's where it really gets quite dangerous, and that's why maybe outsourcing something like this is a good solution.
Interesting. So, and you already mentioned WeFox. So, basically, did you go from Groupon directly to WeFox, or was there anything in the middle?
So after I was at Groupon, I was involved in another smaller startup in London, sitting in the Google Tech Hub. It was a bit like Airbnb, but for students. And I gained some cool insights.
What was the company?
It was called back in the day Flat Club. They rebranded themselves, I think I saw. I learned how to, and this was a company that was maybe like 15 people large, how to grow a smaller company. Afterwards I finished my master's in London as well, did that, and then came back to Berlin, where I basically started as a management consultant, and I flew around a lot, mainly working on with DAX customers, so big corporates.
Also is
DAX, Deutsche Aktienindex. So those guys that are in like the top publicly traded companies. Yeah, okay. So larger companies, usually hidden champions, for example, maybe from Munich. There are some large companies, and I really worked on a lot of restructuring topics and a lot of procurement topics, which basically was a completely different focus. I had to adapt, learn new skills, right? Excel skills were super important, of course, as a consultant. Presentation skills were quite important. But it was a tough learning curve. It was like a bit of an elbow, society there, where you really had to position yourself and really fight actually in this environment.
You mentioned Excel skills among other skills that you had. So let's tackle on that phase first already.
Yeah.
Where did you learn those skills? Was it on the job, or did you have any kind of book or resource that you hung on to be able to learn these particular skills?
Yeah. So actually, it's a really lame quote, but I think it's a quite important quote, and it's one by Richard Branson, and it's basically when he says, take the challenge first, basically, and then see if you can do it, right? So I think this is a very basic entrepreneurial mentality. Okay, if you encounter a problem, you start tackling it, and you learn in the process how to solve it, essentially. And you can't be afraid to do this. So this is same thing goes for the Excel things, right? In my interview, they asked me, okay, how are your Excel skills? I said, yeah, they're okay, right? They're good.
Were they?
And they were, I would say, mediocre. And then they said, okay, cool, you're hired. And so then 2-3 weeks before I started my job, I basically, taught myself Excel. So did like watched all these things, and you can just do a lot through that. It's all in your own hands, basically. And I know a lot of people that have done it that way. So yeah,
I like it, and that's the main area that I think that's also important. I mean, unless you're studying specific set of skills that are more technical, or that you actually need a university, I'm a firm believer of the democratization of education. And that's also something that I plan on doing this with the Pioneers Show, is that show that you don't need a professional degree or academic degree to be a consultant from HR, which even though there's kind of in the same area of business, it's not remotely similar. Yeah. So, and now that going back to WeFox, so you were working for a management consulting. How did WeFox appear in your life? What is WeFox?
So I guess this is the part in life where you also have to be a bit lucky, right? And there's always luck. You can force your luck. I'm a big believer of being able to force your luck. So put yourself into positions where luck might come along, but sometimes you have to be lucky. And basically, one of my old school friends, Julian, who's the CEO and founder of WeFox. So we went to school together, and I hired him back in the day for Groupon, and he stayed there, I think, 6-7 months, and then he basically cloned the Groupon business and took it to Switzerland, and he was running a much more successful business to Groupon in Switzerland back in the day, and he successfully exited that and started WeFox in Berlin, essentially. And he knew that, I had seen how a company scales, how an HR department works, how all these processes work. So, in the beginning, when he was still in Switzerland, he called me and was like, "Hey, can you basically help me, set up this department, help me set up HR." He also got me on board by a very innovative approach based on self-management called Holacracy.
Holacracy, yeah. So we already mentioned that with Nicholas' interview.
Yeah, exactly. So he caught my interest with that as well. Then when WeFox was, I think, maybe 20 people or something, not even, he called me up and asked me, "Hey, would you be ready to take a risk?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Okay, let's do it." I like the sound of the company. I believe that the insurance market is ready for, to be tackled. I think the business model is good, and I can help you. I know that my skills will help you. So I took the flight. I went to Zurich from Berlin, stayed there a couple of months, and then set up the initial processes in Zurich. Then we expanded to Berlin, set up the office here, incorporated an office in Vienna, and also in Barcelona, and basically then grew in the time of about 2 years that I was there, or 2.5 years that I was there, from like these 15 people to 100. I think there are now 160, 170 people. Yeah.
So let's take these 2 steps. For anyone that didn't listen to the Nicholas episode, which I highly recommend, what's Holacracy?
So you're asking basically, the last time I practiced Holacracy was about 1.5 years ago. So, but what it basically is a more self-managed approach to working. So that means every individual in a company can have more than one role. For example, I could have the role in marketing, and I can have a role in HR, and I can have a role in finance. And these roles are created by the organization and by individuals on a bi-weekly basis, for example. And people are only moved in the company as resources. So the the job that the manager now has is only to move resources within the companies in these roles. So basically, he can shift my resources into a role in marketing and in finance, or in finance and in sales, for example, based on me, of course, willing to take this job. So it's a much more flexible approach, because individuals have a lot of skills that you can't really force into one job spec, right? So usually you join a company, you have one job spec, and that job spec always stays the same. Mm-hmm. With this approach, you're basically agile, creating new roles in the company and adjusting the resources according to the demands. Because my key skills, which maybe might be presentational skills, can be used in marketing, but can also be used in sales. Why should I only have one job spec and be able to utilize my skill set in marketing? Why can't I use it in sales as well, for example?
But are you going to be flexible in going to multiple? Are you going to be working in multiple departments at the same time?
For sure. You call them circles then, yeah. So they're no longer departments; they're called circle. It's a different name for a department, yeah.
Interesting. Once again, I highly recommend anyone to listen to Nicholas' episode. We go deeper into holacracy specifically. So you started working at WeFox.
Yeah.
What's WeFox? You already mentioned it's insurtech, but going a little bit deeper into that area. What is it?
Yeah. So basically, what we've built is a platform to manage all your insurances. So as a customer, you can basically digitally, you have a folder of your all insurance, full transparency of your insurances, and the ability to also sign and close new insurances via signature in app. Yeah, so if you're ever in need, it's very hassle-free. You don't need to, get a delivery of 40, 60 pages of paper to your house, but you can just sign in an app, for example. You have the opportunity, if you're not sure about things, to be consulted by consultants and helped with your insurance. You will be helped with your claims as a customer. And yeah, so it basically does everything for you, and it's not, it doesn't affect the money you spend, right? So it doesn't, basically the customer does not have to pay.
I like that. So, okay, let's assume that we have someone listening to this conversation, and that person is saying that I've been in this company for a while doing HR. Mm-hmm. And then goes into management specifically. You already said that these skills can be YouTube tutorials specifically for Excel and those things. But is there any book or resource that you recommend to these people that might be wondering into how to leave the HR world and go to a much more strategy, innovation, management position?
So I wouldn't recommend like a practical book which teaches you skills. I think the most important thing is probably the trigger, right? That triggers, enables you also from a mindset. I think it's a mindset perspective. Yeah. So you need to get out of a mindset where you think I can only do this and that, because it's not true. You can do whatever you want. And basically there's for example a book of a philosopher, a professor of philosophy from UPenn, Angela Duckworth. And it's basically, I think it's even called Grit. And in this book, she mentions that the main skill to have, or characteristic of successful people, is actually grit and perseverance. Yeah? So grit being the ability to cope with rejections, being tough, and being able to basically conquer new challenges. So I would recommend this book in short.
Great.
It's very good. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So now you're working at WeFox now in this chronological area.
Yeah.
You're working at WeFox. You're doing HR for this incredible company. You're using your own knowledge in terms of how to scale up HR teams.
Yeah.
What then, I mean, you're already pretty successful because I assume that company is growing.
Yeah.
The company grows. You're being more successful as a company. You're being more successful as a professional person. What makes you? Can we consider first of all WeFox as a startup, or is it more of a company?
Well, I'm not sure. I would say it's in between a startup and a grown-up, right? Somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what makes you leave that company and start OrgOS?
Okay, so I'm always a firm believer of basically as soon as you learned a new skill and ability, to basically optimize the skill and ability and then work on this and on these skills. And as soon as you are a master of these, you basically give it away. And you teach someone else how to do it, and then you go on to the next thing and learn something else. So this is how basically I also ran the HR department at WeFox pretty simply, right? I set up the first payroll processes and so forth in Switzerland myself. I did everything myself, and then I hired someone there. He or she did it, and then I went to Berlin, did the same thing here. Hired someone here to do it. So as soon as I did it,
you were outsourcing some things for yourself.
For myself, basically. Well, yeah, it was still in the company, right?
Yeah, but you're outsourcing your own role.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. That's it. And then I go on to the next topic. I tackle it. I learn how to do it. I do it myself, and then I optimize it, and then I give it away again. And this is essentially the same process that happened with my own role. So I would say I was sort of at the pinnacle for my understanding what I wanted to do, what I wanted to reach in this company. So there was a good team set up. There was relatively good processes set up, and so it was time for me to move on to the next challenge. And that's where OrgOS really came into play.
And what is OrgOS?
So OrgOS is stands for Organizational Operating System. It's basically an HR platform to digitize all your HR needs. So all the way from HR admin, such as maybe onboarding or time off absence approval, to recruiting, and then also at looking at the engagement levels of your employees and really developing them further according to their needs.
So you tackle all the HR needs of a company from hiring, or you don't tackle hiring as well?
We tackle hiring as well. Yeah, for sure.
So you're basically an admin back office to a company.
Yeah. So it depends on how you look at us, right? So on the one hand side, we're basically the backbone of the HR department. So we provide you with, as a startup, for example, with a backbone to scale and put policies and processes in place, and for you to concentrate on really important things. So such as really deep conversations also with employees, and not focusing too much on the administrative side. So basically, looking at the employee engagement.
You're the backbone of the company. Yeah, you're taking care of authorizations when someone leaves.
Yeah, offboarding, I would say.
Offboarding?
Yeah.
So when I said leaves is on vacation.
Okay, yes, that
but
as well.
But you're doing offboarding as well.
Yeah.
You're doing onboarding. So you're managing the whole life cycle of any employee.
Exactly, that's it.
Do you take care of payroll?
So payroll, we also take care of, but not specifically. That's not our focal point, I would say.
But and this might be a weird question, but isn't HR usually the ones that take care of that?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Usually you have payroll outsourced. So of course we provide a platform where you can upload pay slips, download them. You have your compensation history in our tool. But yeah, for sure, it doesn't allow you basically to calculate for example, your net salary or something like this. That doesn't work. We don't do that. We're not a calculator basically.
Okay, so you're more in the HR assistant skill, and this is actually something that I'm really passionate about. Not HR specifically. I'm sorry about that, but I think that every time someone builds a product that's meant to empower someone else, some department, some person, something, I think that's always very interesting to hear about. You're the co-founder, correct?
Yeah.
What were the main drives? Did you feel like something was missing? What made you create OrgOS?
So I think one important thing in to take away as well is you shouldn't be afraid to pivot business models. So when we started, or when OrgoS started, it was actually a business model, or it was a model focused on the employee, whereas it was sort of based on this idea of self-management, where all you did was basically
taking the holacracy method.
Yeah, exactly, and it was basically focused on putting the necessary resources from a people perspective and matching it with a demand. So it was more like a staffing tool. And then we realized quickly that actually this approach is a very niche one. So we pivoted, and then we created a holistic, basically, platform for all your needs. Because we also learned that there are a couple of solutions out there, but they're not very good from a technical perspective, and they do not focus on the employee. And we really want to focus on the employee. He's our basically end user, and he should log into the system. He should use it. He should love it, and possibly he should go to the company and say, "Hey, I've used OrgoS in the past. I love it. It's great. It helped me a lot. I want to use it again."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. And what made you? You already mentioned that the first market was a little bit niche. But what was the main mental build that made you want to? Because I don't think I've talked with a lot of people that have gone through pivots. I've talked with one person that went through 4, so that kind of averages out. But what made you go from a very niche market to a more holistic view of how an HR department runs?
Well, I think there's a lot of trends in HRs, same as there are in any other industry. And banking on one trend is pretty dangerous. Mm-hmm. So banking on the self-management trend, it can be great and it can work, but it's nothing that fixes all your problems. And I didn't believe, or I don't think it's a sustainable solution, this holacracy. So actually I believe that it works for some companies, but for others it doesn't, for example. So yeah.
What, if I may ask, okay, then let me change the question. In your own mind, what are the benefits of holacracy, and what are the disadvantages that might make some business be fitted to use that practice?
Okay, so the advantages of holacracy are, for example, that you really have quite a democratic process, I would call it, whereas everyone in the company has a say and is heard and has a voice, and the organizational structure and policies and all these things are adapted according to really the employees' also wishes. On the other hand side, you also have employees who do not want to take part in those things, right? They're happy to do their own repetitive tasks and monotonous tasks, and they feel uncomfortable with having to take an active role within a company to structure this company and to shape the company. So it depends on the type of person as well, right? So if you look at the Empower people, these guys are, full of energy, full of willingness to change and adapt and to test out new things, to trial things. But there's maybe also people that don't work like that and don't operate, that are happy doing things just as usual. And yeah.
I understand. I think I understand. So it seems like holacracy, it's a very interesting approach, but like you said, it's not an end-all be-all solution for all businesses. Depends on how the culture it's cultivated from the get-go.
Yeah, sure.
So, and what have been the main struggles of OrgoS as you're building? Because it seems like besides that company that was Airbnb for students, from the moment you started working, you were plugged into already existing companies. Groupon, you went into the London building, London office, so which means that there was already a pretty big following in Berlin. When you went to WeFox, you said you were 20 people, but even so, it was already quite successful in Switzerland.
Well, it was pre-launch in Switzerland, to be honest. So actually, that wasn't such a sustainable company yet, or a stable company, right? So, and the only money that was in there was angel money. So there was no professional round back in the day in WeFox. So it was actually quite a big risk. And taking that to the challenges now, I guess it's the multitude of tasks that you have to be willing to do in the beginning to find the answer to growth, essentially. So that's one of my main roles in the company, is growing from a revenue perspective. So figuring out what are the channels that work, and then also, of course, focusing on maybe completely other tasks in the meantime. So, such as, for example, having to convince investors, or running marketing initiatives, or all these things that are basically very different tasks you have to combine into one basket, and you have to juggle a lot of balls essentially at the same time. So that's the main. I think that's the main struggle. Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like that might be very interesting for you, because you seem, from your experience, from some of the answers that you just gave me, you seem like someone who thrives.
Yeah.
Or strives.
I do thrive I thrive in this environment, and I would say it's a love-hate relationship, right? And for me, it's about the balance always. So it's the balance of really stretching yourself, but not overstretching yourself in these tasks. And so I love stress, but I think there's healthy stress and there's really bad stress.
A lot of pressure.
And a lot of pressure. I love pressure as well, for sure. Yeah.
Do you think that these are separate in the business world when we're talking about launching a company? What I've been feeling when I talk with a lot of people is that sometimes pressure gets mistaken with stress gets mistaken to the body response to pressure. Someone might be interested in pressure, but might not love stress. Does that make sense? Do you like the two feelings?
So I think pressure is an external factor, right? That affects you, and stress is something you can control and work with yourself as an individual. So I think it's something you can combat and you can learn how to deal with. And that is of course very interesting for me myself as also a founder, to put myself into positions that maybe I'm not so comfortable with, but then I learn how to do it, and I thrive maybe under this sort of pressure that maybe also puts me under stress, and I learn how to cope with it essentially.
You seem like a person who, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is actually something that's captivating you a lot in this conversation, is that you seem like someone who has a very specific background in terms of HR organization, but then you've been jumping around in different roles, even though specifically for WeFox, you were back in that train, even though you were no longer looking at it in an HR performance perspective, but more on an operational level. How can I optimize and outsource your own role? But in OrgOS as a co-founder, usually it's very hard to outsource your own self.
Yeah.
And now you were saying about marketing meetings, investor meetings, doing A, B, and C. Is there any, I'm going back to the resources because this is a much more career-focused podcast. But at the same time, first of all, let's focus on resources.
Yeah.
Is there any books besides Grit? You already mentioned that. Is there any books, any online courses, any magazine that you, or any audiobook, I don't care, any podcast that you might listen that you might feel like it's very important for people who might feel like they're at a disadvantage when they're not a technical co-founder, or they come for a much more social science like HR, I assume it is. Because you're a co-founder of a tech company in HR, even though it's HR, it's tech company.
Yeah.
It's a SaaS product, even though
so there's a lot of SaaS podcasts that I listen to, right? So SaaS Doc, for example, and all these podcasts that, of course, I listen to in my free time, and that helped me a lot, especially with topics that maybe I have never acquainted before this, right? So I've never been in B2B SaaS. Yeah, so it's a very specific business with very specific metrics such as ACV, ARR, all these things.
Okay, wait. I need to stop you.
Yeah.
For people who don't know what those terms are, can you just give literal translation of what that means?
Yeah, so I mean,
SaaS is software as a service.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And ACV is just annual contract volume, for example, but you would never know this. Or MRR, for example,
Monthly
is
recurring revenue.
Yeah, exactly. And those things are very important metrics, of course, that you're looking at. And you just need to get a feeling of basically this sales environment of a B2B SaaS solution. Who are you selling to? What are the businesses? Are they startups? Are they enterprise level? Because the sales cycle can be very, very long. And you need to basically figure out quickly, okay, what is the route that you're picking? Is it the right one? Am I going down this one properly? So this again goes back to this topic of resources where I'm constantly thinking about, where do I spend my resources as a founder, basically? Because you have a very limited amount of resources, and you need to spend it there where it's the most effective and the most efficient. So a lot of the times I will try to just, take time off, or in the evenings, like do something completely else, go out, jog, and I think about all the ways to spend my resources the next 3 days. And I'm really into planning as well. So I completely structure my days according to my calendar. Yeah. So that's very important.
This might be one of the most interesting conversations I've had in terms of non-technical founders arranging methods and their own automations that I've heard. I mean, everyone in the Pioneers podcast has been incredible, but you seem to have a different approach, even in thinking, in talking about it. And I congratulate you on that, because you're making me think about specific areas but in specific ways. And I'm adapting my own thought. And I hope that everybody that's listening can feel like I am feeling like now, that there's something there. I still don't understand what are you saying that's touching me here in my head, but there's something that's bumping me in the back of my head that's making me think, like, make me think. Okay, now it's the time for the lightning round.
Yeah, cool.
Lightning round is really easy.
Yeah.
I'll ask you one question or do a sentence in ... and you have less than 1 minute to answer.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
What's the main book that has impacted you the most? Doesn't have to be business, it's the main book that has impacted you the most. Besides Grit, please.
Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux.
Also mentioned already in the Nicholas podcast.
Okay. Then I have to mention another one, right?
No worries. I think that's interesting, because eventually, if that person is still alive, I might try to say, hey, we've had people, let's get you on the podcast. Let's figure out what's the main thing that's going in that mind that's impacting all these minds. Yeah. Tell me something you've changed your opinion in the last 6 months.
I would say what I've learned, this is probably actually quite painful, but actually it wasn't painful at all. It just took balls, was basically to differentiate between things that are important and unimportant. And if they're unimportant, then you have to cut them out of your life.
Okay, then we'll have to take a little bit more than 1 minute in this. If you don't mind. If it's too personal, we don't have to go deeper into this. But is there any mental framework that made you decide what's important and unimportant? And we're talking about important things. Are we talking about friends? Are we talking about
it can be anything.
Things?
It can be anything, really. I wouldn't. I mean, I'm talking a lot about business, but you can also refer this to other areas. But basically, you need to think about. So I was at a stage where I was doing a lot of stuff, and I had the feeling I was only moving forward very slowly. So because I was doing this multitude of stuff with a high quantity, I wasn't doing everything as focused as I could. So then I decided to look at my calendar again, all the stuff that I had set up, all my emails, and decided to look, okay, what can I cut out? So I just, as a very practical thing, I looked at my meetings and I said, okay, I'm not going to go do this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. And then I took my time and I focused on the things that are important. Yeah.
Interesting. Is there any life motto or quote that you like to live by?
So I guess my one would just be listen more, actually. And that's a lot of people give this advice, but I would just recommend it because you learn so much by listening. It's incredible. Because there can be so much miscommunication when you think you know something about someone or you know something about a situation and you actually don't, in fact, because you never listened.
Okay.
And you can't solve the problem, or you don't have an answer.
If I gave you 6 months to prepare to do a TED Talk and couldn't be about OrgOS, what would it be about?
It would probably be about the ability of an individual to achieve anything they want if they put their mind to it. I think it's completely
up to us.
Yeah, it's all psychology.
Okay, 2 other questions and then we say goodbye.
Yeah.
What if you had the chance to go back in time and have a conversation with just graduated self? What would be the first words you would say to him rather than, hey, I'm from the future, listen to me? What would be the first things you would say?
I would say trust yourself more.
Last question of the lightning round. What are the physical activities, not business related, that you see that have the most impact in your life?
Physical activities. So for sure, I mean, I used to play a lot of field hockey, tennis, all these things in my past. And then I just didn't have the time and the flexibility to follow this anymore. So since the last 4 or 5 years, I had to basically go out and do sports and jog a lot, which is a very boring task. And I
don't think it is. I love jog. If I didn't have injury in my back, I would jog every day.
Really?
Because those are the times that I have total mental clarity.
Yeah.
Or I'm back on my podcast, or I just, for example, I'm not a big runner because I've huge back spine issues, but at one point I remember I did a 10K run, and after that 10K run, I remember everything that was in my mind. It flew off. Everything that I had to schedule for that week, I scheduled in my head, and I got into a paper, wrote everything down, got to sleep. But when I got back, I was energized and was ready to tackle things head on, because I think that it's one of the most personal things someone can do when it's alone.
Yeah. I think it's a cliche, but it's true. When you completely shut off, and you don't think about it, then the best ideas come, and that's always the way it is. So that's the thing I look most forward to when I go jogging or I'm in the morning in the shower or whatever, because those are the instances when you're not thinking about work and you have the best ideas. But of course, this monotonous job of running around and trying to sweat as much as possible is a bit frustrating in my perspective. I would rather have a football in front of me, or I don't know, something to chase.
For me, it's a basketball. If I had a basketball,
Cool.
I could spend 3 hours playing basketball. Okay,
cool.
Max, thank you so much for your time. It was really great pleasure having you on the Pioneers Show. Where can people find more about OrgOS, and where can people find you?
Sure, for sure. So you can find us on www.orgos.io, of course on Twitter as well, and you can find me on LinkedIn or anywhere, or you can email me if you have a question, max@orgos.io. Happy for you to reach out.
Okay. Max, it was a great pleasure having you here on the Pioneers Show, and I hope to see OrgOS reach the heights that it truly deserves. Have a great time.
Thank you, Andre. Thanks.
Thank you so much for plugging into this episode. I truly hope you love this conversation as much as I did. Max was a great sport, and he's really interesting, as is his company. I do encourage that you reach out to him, for I'm sure he'll be able to give you some pointers for what you're trying to achieve in your life. Any other information that you might have missed will probably be linked up in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, consider subscribing to make sure that this podcast grows, we can get some more people and help everyone be the pioneers of their lives and careers. Also, if there's any feedback, feel free to reach out to me on social media. A big thank you to Max for his time, and to Thibaut Flondlin, aka DJ Rodia, for the music of the show. It's great being back launching new episodes. So, until next time, have a nice time. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.